Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. We never planned for any of this. And honestly, if you had told me a year ago that my life would turn out this way, I would have laughed and said you were watching too many movies. But here I am, sitting in front of this camera, ready to tell you a story that still gives me chills every single time I think about it. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and please, stay with me until the end, because this one is going to stay with you. My name is Al. I was married to a man named Al for 3 years. He was kind, hardworking, a little too focused on his job sometimes, but I loved him. We had built something real together. A small home, a shared life, inside jokes, morning routines, all the little things that make a relationship feel like home. And his best friend? Also named Al. The 3 of us had known each other since college. We were all in the same circle, the same parties, the same late-night conversations that lasted until sunrise. He was family, or at least that's what we all told ourselves. Then my husband got a work assignment out of state. 3 months, he said. Maybe 4. He was nervous about leaving me alone, not because he didn't trust me, but because I had been going through a rough patch emotionally. Stress, anxiety, just that heavy feeling that sometimes settles over you when life gets too quiet. So before he boarded that flight, he pulled Al aside and asked him to look after me. Check in, make sure I was okay, maybe take me out for dinner once in a while so I wouldn't sit alone in that empty house every night. It sounded simple. It was supposed to be simple. But the thing about emotions is they don't follow plans. And the thing about 2 people spending quiet evenings together, sharing real conversations, laughing at the same things, and slowly letting their guards down, is that something unexpected can grow in the space between words that were never supposed to mean anything more. Al started coming by every few days. First it was just a quick check-in. Then it was dinner. Then it was long walks after dinner where we talked about things I had never even told my husband. Not because I was hiding anything, but because some conversations only happen between people who meet each other exactly where they are in life. I want to be clear before we go any further. Nobody in this story is a villain. Nobody woke up one morning and decided to hurt someone they loved. This is a story about real people, real feelings, and the complicated, messy, achingly human experience of falling into something you never saw coming. And it all started the moment my husband handed over his trust to the one person who would end up changing everything. The first time Al stayed past midnight, neither of us noticed how late it had gotten. We were deep in conversation, the kind that pulls you in slowly, like a current you don't feel until you're already far from shore. He had brought takeout, nothing special, just burgers and fries from the place down the street that my husband and I used to order from on lazy Sundays. But somehow, that night, sitting across from Al at the same kitchen table, everything felt different. Not wrong. Just different. He asked me how I was really doing. Not the polite version of that question that people ask when they're just being nice. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and looked at me like my answer actually mattered. And something inside me just opened up. I told him about the loneliness. About how the house felt too big at night. About how I had been falling asleep with the television on just to hear another voice in the room. I hadn't admitted any of that to my husband, not because he wouldn't care, but because I didn't want him to feel guilty for leaving. Al listened to every word without interrupting. And when I was done, he didn't try to fix anything. He just said, "You shouldn't have to feel like that alone." Simple words. But they landed somewhere deep. After that night, his visits became something I looked forward to more than I wanted to admit. He would text in the morning, just a casual, "How'd you sleep?" and I would find myself smiling before I even fully woke up. We started cooking dinner together instead of ordering out. He would stand at the counter chopping vegetables while I stirred something on the stove, and we would just talk. About our lives, our memories from college, the dreams we had buried under the weight of growing up. He remembered things I had said years ago. Little details I had forgotten I ever mentioned. And that attention, that quiet, consistent presence, it was doing something to me that I was trying very hard not to name. My husband called every night. I always picked up. I always smiled through the phone. And every time we hung up, the silence that followed felt heavier than it did the night before. I told myself it was just friendship. I told myself Al was just being a good person, doing exactly what my husband had asked him to do. But deep down, in that honest place that we all try to ignore, I knew something had already shifted. I just wasn't ready to look at it directly yet. There was one evening I keep coming back to in my mind. It was raining outside, one of those heavy, unrelenting rains that makes the whole world feel smaller and closer. Al had come over to help me fix a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink, something my husband would have handled without a second thought. We were laughing about how neither of us actually knew what we were doing, tools spread across the floor, water dripping onto an old towel, and at some point we both reached for the same wrench at the same time. His hand covered mine for just a second. Maybe 2 seconds. He pulled back immediately, and so did I, and we both looked away like nothing had happened. But the air in that kitchen changed. I felt it in my chest, that quiet electric shift that you cannot explain but you absolutely cannot ignore. We finished fixing the pipe mostly in silence after that, and when he left that night, he hugged me at the door the way he always did. But he held on just a half-second longer than usual. And I noticed. I hated that I noticed. I started paying attention to things I had no business paying attention to. The way he remembered how I liked my coffee without asking. The way he always texted back within minutes, no matter the time. The way he looked at me sometimes mid-conversation, like he was thinking something he had decided not to say out loud. Every small thing was becoming something I turned over in my mind late at night when the house was quiet and my husband's side of the bed was cold and empty. My best friend, also named Al, called me one afternoon while I was folding laundry. She had noticed something in my voice over recent weeks, that careful, distracted quality that best friends always catch before you even realize it yourself. She asked me straight out if everything was okay with my marriage. I told her yes, of course, everything was fine. My husband was just away for work. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "And how's Al doing?" She said his name the way people say a name when they already suspect the answer to the question they're really asking. I changed the subject quickly. Too quickly. And after we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the wall. The thing that scared me most was not what I was feeling. Feelings are just feelings, they come and go. They don't always mean something permanent. What scared me was how natural everything had started to feel. Cooking together, laughing together, sitting in comfortable silence together. It didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like breathing. And that was the most dangerous part of all. My husband called that same night, excited, telling me the project was ahead of schedule. He might be home sooner than expected. And instead of feeling the rush of relief and joy I should have felt, what I felt was something closer to panic. A sudden, lurching awareness that I had let something grow in the space of his absence without ever making a single conscious decision to do so. I told him I missed him. And I meant it. But I also knew that missing someone and being pulled towards someone else at the same time was a contradiction I was not ready to untangle. So I just held the phone a little tighter, laughed at something he said, and told him to get some sleep. After we hung up I walked to the window and stood there in the dark, watching the streetlights reflect off the wet pavement below. And without even thinking about it, I picked up my phone and opened Al's contact. I didn't text anything. I just stared at his name for a long moment, then put the phone face down on the windowsill. Some lines are not crossed all at once. They are crossed slowly, quietly, one almost innocent moment at a time. The week before my husband was supposed to come home was the hardest week of my life. Not because anything dramatic happened. Actually, it was the opposite. Everything was too quiet, too still, like that heavy pause before a storm finally breaks. I went through my days on autopilot, cleaning things that were already clean, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging, keeping my hands busy so my mind wouldn't wander somewhere I couldn't come back from easily. Al still came by. But something between us had shifted into a higher, more careful gear. We were both more aware of the space between us now. Where before we would sit close on the couch watching a movie without thinking twice, now there was this invisible line that neither of us acknowledged out loud but both of us felt. He would sit at one end, would sit at the other, and the distance that was supposed to feel safe somehow felt louder than any closeness ever had. One evening he showed up with groceries, said he wanted to cook dinner properly for once instead of ordering in. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching him move around the space like he belonged there, and something in my chest pulled so tight it almost hurt. He caught me staring and smiled, that easy natural smile that I had stopped being able to look at without feeling something complicated underneath. We ate dinner slowly that night. Neither of us was in a hurry. The conversation kept drifting into longer silences, but they weren't uncomfortable silences. They were the kind that feel full rather than empty. At one point he looked at me across the table and started to say something, then stopped himself. I asked him what he was going to say. He shook his head slowly and just said, "Nothing. Never mind." But his eyes said something completely different. That night after he left I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, the same cabinet we had fixed together weeks ago, and I let myself finally ask the question I had been running from since the very beginning. Not what he felt. Not what I felt. But what happened next? Because my husband was coming home in 6 days. And whatever this was, whatever had quietly built itself between two people who were never supposed to feel this way, it was about to meet the moment it could no longer hide from. That I thought I had 5 more days to figure things out. I was wrong. My husband called on a Tuesday morning, earlier than usual, and the moment I heard his voice I could tell something was different. He sounded lighter, almost giddy, the way he used to sound when he had good news he could barely hold in. He told me the project had wrapped up 2 days ahead of schedule and that he had already booked a flight. He was coming home the next morning. Tomorrow. I had less than 24 hours and absolutely no idea what I was going to do with the weight of everything I had been carrying around for weeks. I said all the right things. I told him I was so happy, that I couldn't wait, that the house had felt so empty without him. Every word was true. That was the hardest part. I genuinely missed my husband. I loved him. And yet when I hung up the phone, the first person I thought about calling was Al. I didn't call him. I sat with that impulse and I let it pass. Instead I spent the day cleaning the house, buying my husband's favorite snacks, trying to press myself back into the shape of the life I had before all of this started. But somewhere around 8 o'clock that evening, my doorbell rang. Al was standing on the porch with a small paper bag and an expression I had never seen on his face before. Something open and unguarded and almost painful to look at. He said he had heard from my husband too, that Al had called him to share the good news and mentioned he was heading home early. And then Al said something that stopped me completely still. He said, "I just needed to see you before everything goes back to normal." I stepped back to let him in without saying a word. We sat in the living room, not the kitchen this time, and the paper bag sat forgotten on the coffee table between us. He told me that these past weeks had meant something to him. Not in a way that was trying to start something or break something. Just honest. Just real. He said he didn't expect anything and he wasn't asking for anything. He just couldn't let the chapter close without being truthful, because carrying something unspoken felt worse than the vulnerability of saying it out loud. My heart was beating so loud I was sure he could hear it. And then, just as I opened my mouth to respond, my phone lit up on the couch cushion beside me. A text from my husband. A photo. He was already at the airport, grinning in that familiar way, holding up his boarding pass like a little trophy. The caption read, "Can't wait to come home to you." I looked at the screen. Then I looked at Al sitting across from me, waiting quietly, giving me all the space in the world while somehow filling every inch of it. 2 versions of my life were sitting in the same room at the same time. One on a glowing screen. One in the warm, steady presence of a man who had somehow become the person I talked to about everything without ever planning to. And for the first time since this all began, I understood that the moment I had been dreading and the moment I had been quietly hoping for were actually the same moment. I set my phone face down on the cushion. And I looked at Al, really looked at him. And I finally said the thing I had been thinking for weeks, that I told Al that I was grateful. That was the word I used, and I meant it in the deepest, most honest way a person can mean something. I told him that these weeks had changed me, that his presence had shown me something about myself I hadn't known was missing. That somewhere in the quiet evenings and long conversations and shared silences, I had remembered who I was before life got so heavy and routine and predictable. He had given me that without even trying. He listened without moving. His eyes were steady and soft and full of something that looked a lot like both relief and heartbreak at the same time. And then I told him the rest. I told him that what I had realized, sitting in that house night after night, was not that I had fallen for the wrong person. It was that I had slowly stopped showing up for the right one. My husband was a good man who loved me completely, and somewhere along the way I had let the distance between us grow so wide that someone else had been able to walk right into that space without either of us meaning for it to happen. That was not Al's fault. It was not even entirely mine. It was just what happens when two people stop being intentional about each other. Al nodded slowly. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then back up at me. And then he did something I did not expect. He smiled. A quiet, real, slightly sad smile. And he said, "I know. I think I knew this whole time." He stood up, picked up the forgotten paper bag from the coffee table and set it gently in my hands. Inside was a framed photo from our college days, the three of us, my husband, Al, and me, laughing at something none of us could probably even remember anymore. He said he had found it while cleaning out an old box and thought I might want it back. I held that frame and felt something crack open in my chest in the best possible way. He hugged me at the door, the way he always did. And this time the length of it was exactly right. Not too long. Not too short. Just enough. He left. And 20 minutes later, headlights swept across the living room wall. A car door. Footsteps on the porch. And then my husband was standing in the doorway, bags dropped, arms already open, that familiar face wearing the most genuine smile I had seen in months. I walked straight into him. And I held on like I was starting over. But here is the twist I never saw coming. The next morning over breakfast, my husband reached across the table, took my hand, and said quietly, "Al told me everything." My heart stopped. He looked at me with calm, knowing eyes and said, "Not what you think. He called me 2 weeks ago and told me he was worried about you. That you seemed lonely and that I should come home sooner." He paused. "He was looking after you, exactly like I asked. But he was also looking after us." I stared at him. All those evenings. All that tension and electricity and quiet confusion. And underneath all of it, Al had been protecting my marriage the entire time that I sat at that breakfast table for a long moment, just looking at my husband's face, trying to absorb what he had just told me. Al had called him. 2 weeks ago. While I was standing at windows late at night, while I was turning my feelings over in my hands like something fragile, Al had quietly picked up the phone and done the most selfless thing a person could do. He had pointed my husband back toward me without making it about himself even once. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did both, right there over scrambled eggs and morning coffee. My husband squeezed my hand across the table and didn't say anything for a while. He didn't need to. Some moments are big enough that words just get in the way. Later that afternoon I texted Al. Just 3 words. "I know now." He replied almost immediately with a simple, "Good." And then after a short pause, one more message came through. "Take care of each other." That's all I ever wanted. I put my phone down and looked out the window at the familiar street outside, the same street I had stared at so many nights feeling lost, and for the first time in months everything looked clear. The weeks that followed felt like a quiet rebuilding. Not dramatic, not rushed. Just 2 people choosing each other again with a little more awareness than before. My husband and I started having the kinds of conversations I had been having with Al, honest ones, unhurried ones, the kind where you actually say what you mean instead of saying what's easy. We started cooking dinner together. We started taking evening walks. Small things, but the small things are where love either grows or quietly disappears. I think about what that season taught me and it comes down to something simple. Loneliness inside a relationship is one of the quietest and most dangerous kinds of loneliness because it hides so well. You can share a home with someone, share a last name, share a bed, and still feel invisible if you both stop paying attention. What AL's friendship did, without either of us intending it, was hold up a mirror. It showed me the gap that had opened up and gave me the chance to close it before it became something permanent. Al came over for dinner about a month later, the three of us around the same kitchen table, laughing about old college memories, arguing over what movie to watch afterward. Everything was normal. Everything was real. And at one point my husband put his arm around my shoulder mid-laugh and pulled me close without even thinking about it, the way you do with someone who is just yours, completely and comfortably yours. I caught Al's eye across the table and he gave me the smallest nod. Like a quiet period at the end of a long and winding sentence. Some stories don't end with grand gestures. They end with a dinner table, people who chose honesty over comfort, and a friendship strong enough to survive its own complicated chapter. That is the ending I got. And honestly, it is the only one I would have wanted. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of something real in your own life, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me what you thought of the ending. Did Al do the right thing? Would you have made the same choices? And if you want to see a sequel to this story, let me know because I have a feeling this is not the last complicated chapter these three have ahead of them.